The dirt road leading into Millstone Heights hadn't changed much in the 10 years I'd been away. The same tall sycamores lined the shoulders, casting flickering shadows on the cracked asphalt. The same bend before the ridge dipped down toward the lake. The same quiet charm wrapped around rows of craftsman homes and manicured lawns. But beneath the surface, I could feel it something rigid, manufactured, uneasy. I pulled the truck over at the turnoff near Ridgewood Lane, where the GPS marked the edge of the proposed site. The wind carried that familiar scent of pine and lake mist. Murphy, my aging Labrador mix, lifted his head in the passenger seat, tail thumping softly. Even he remembered this place. This was where I grew up, where my father worked road crews and built retaining walls by hand, where my mother volunteered in the same library that now sat empty, pending beautification. I left this town for the military, then stayed gone longer than I planned, public infrastructure, regional disaster recovery, and eventually policy design. I didn't chase titles, but one day I found myself sitting in the governor's office, outlining a land resilience initiative in the wake of worsening flood seasons. "You're from Millstone, right?" Governor Hadley had asked me that day, scanning the map on the table. "That's one of the most vulnerable tracts near the Ridgewater Lake Basin. I want you on that." "Permission to send a team?" I asked. "No," she said. "I want you." That's how I came back, not as a visitor, but as the state project director for environmental stabilization and emergency-grade infrastructure. On paper, it was about erosion control and pre-disaster mitigation. In reality, it was about making sure people didn't lose their homes when the next major storm swept through the valley. I stepped out of the truck boots, crunching gravel. The project plan called for 5 acres of trench stabilization, controlled slope reinforcement, and limited access road widening. We had state permits, environmental clearance, and most importantly, legal jurisdiction to operate on parcels earmarked as critical resilience zones. The area included a section of land that had once been vacant scrub. Now it bordered a newly built subdivision overseen by a homeowners association. I'd never heard of Millstone Waterside HOA. The bulldozer arrived just after lunch, bright yellow, new humming with readiness. I stood beside it with my site engineer, a young woman named Kayla, as she reviewed the grading lines. Everything was green-lit, stakes in the ground, temporary boundary flags, no private fences, no mailboxes, no gardens, nothing. We'd barely begun scraping the outermost layer of topsoil when a voice called out across the clearing. Excuse me. I turned. She walked like she owned the earth beneath her heels. Late 50s, maybe early 60s. Blonde bobbed hair, styled just enough to say she meant business. Sunglasses. A coral pink button-down with a tiny golden pin on the collar that read HOA President. She stopped a foot from me, chin lifted, arms folded over a clipboard. The posture of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You can't be here," she said flatly. I kept my hands relaxed at my sides. "This is a state-authorized operation. Emergency mitigation zone. You're standing on it." She blinked. "There's no emergency here. This land is under HOA jurisdiction." I tilted my head. "That's incorrect. This parcel is still listed under county management and has been rezoned as part of the Ridgewater Stabilization Project. We have full clearance." She stepped closer. "This area is part of the Millstone Waterside Commons. It's been adopted by the HOA. We maintain it. We control it." Kayla, sensing the shift, stepped forward with a copy of the project permits in hand. "Ma'am, these are official state documents, signed by the governor's office. The area was never legally annexed by any HOA." Karen didn't even glance at them. "What's your name?" she asked me. "Callahan," I said. "Eli Callahan." That gave her pause. She tilted her head. "You're not from around here, are you?" I smiled slightly. "Born 2 miles from here. Millstone Elementary class of '92. That threw her off for just a beat. Then she rallied. "Well, I don't care what paper you have. You can't bring heavy equipment onto HOA-maintained property without express written consent from the board. And I am the board." "I don't need your consent," I replied evenly. Her eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me?" "This project falls under Section 18 of the State Resilience Initiative. I answer to the Department of Emergency Infrastructure and the governor directly. And you're currently interfering with a priority operation." Her voice rose. "Are you threatening me?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm informing you." She snapped her fingers at someone behind her. A man in a safety vest, likely a HOA groundskeeper, jogged up, clearly unsure of what he was walking into. "Have them stop the bulldozer," she ordered. The man hesitated, looked at me. Kayla held up the permit again. "Sir, you will be personally liable for any attempt to disrupt this equipment." "I don't care," Karen snapped. "Call the sheriff. Tell him they're trespassing." Kayla turned to me. "Do we shut it down?" "No," I said. "We keep working." Karen stepped in front of the bulldozer path. I said, "Stop," she shouted. The bulldozer operator, an older guy named Vince, with 30 years of federal contract work behind him, tapped the brake and shut it down out of caution. Not fear, just protocol. Karen turned to me triumphant. "Now, leave, or I'll have every news station in the state here by nightfall." I didn't answer. I simply pulled out my phone and made one call. A single ring. Hadley, the governor, answered. "Minor issue at Millstone. HOA interference." Pause, then put me on speaker. I did. The voice that rang out across the clearing was calm, direct, and unmistakable. "This is Governor Hadley. Mr. Callahan is operating under direct executive authority. Any attempt to obstruct his work constitutes interference with state infrastructure and will be prosecuted. Step aside." Karen's mouth fell open. "This isn't legal," she sputtered. "It's completely legal," the governor replied. "Now move, or I'll send the state patrol." The call ended. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Karen stared at me like the ground had shifted beneath her shoes. "You didn't tell me you worked for her." "I didn't need to," I said. "You just needed to listen." And with that, I nodded to Vince. The bulldozer rumbled back to life. Karen stood still for a long moment, then turned and stormed away, red in the face. Murphy, who'd been sitting beside the truck the whole time, barked once, a low, satisfied sound. I scratched his head. We're just getting started. By the time the sun crested above the ridgeline the next morning, I was already on site with the survey team. We had chalk lines down the earth cleared in strips, and Vince's bulldozer humming steadily as it graded the incline near the south edge of the project zone. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. No protests, no delays. But I knew better than to think it would last. Karen hadn't called, the state patrol hadn't filed a formal complaint yet, but her silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. The kind that meant she was regrouping, circling the wagons, probably calling in every favor she'd built up over her years of running Millstone Waterside HOA, like a miniature fiefdom. I didn't have to wait long for the next move. At 9:42 a.m., Kayla approached me, brows furrowed, her walk brisk. "She's back," she said, "and she brought friends." I looked up from the tablet where I'd been reviewing the sediment plan. Down the trail leading in from the paved subdivision road, I saw them, Karen at the front, flanked by two men in matching polo shirts with the HOA logo, and behind them half a dozen neighborhood residents with folded arms and skeptical faces. One of the men, tall, bald, and built like a linebacker, carried a walkie-talkie and wore a badge that said HOA Enforcement Officer. The other clutched a binder thick enough to hold a class action lawsuit. "Let's keep working," I said to Kayla, "but bring the cameras online." She nodded and headed for the mobile operations trailer. Every part of the site was monitored not just for safety, but for legal accountability. If they were planning a stunt, I wanted every frame documented. Karen led her group straight into the flagged boundary zone and planted herself in front of the bulldozer again, this time with arms spread. "Stop the machinery," she barked. "You're in violation of HOA ordinances and community conservation rules." Vince killed the engine again, not because he had to, but because he was smart. No need to escalate. Not yet. I walked toward her slowly, making sure my body language was open, not confrontational. But my patience was thinner than the morning mist. "You were warned yesterday," I said, "and told clearly that this is a state-authorized operation. You don't own this land," Karen shot back. "The HOA has maintained this parcel for 5 years. We've landscaped it. We've funded erosion control of our own. We even installed benches along the trail. It's ours. It's designated public access land," I corrected. "And now it's a state-recognized resilience project zone. You can't claim jurisdiction just because you mowed the grass and called it stewardship." The man with the binder stepped forward. "We have records, meeting minutes, budget allocations for this space, and not one of those has legal standing," I replied. "I've reviewed the county records. There was no formal transfer, no easement filing, no annexation approval. You've been squatting on public land and calling it community property." "You're intimidating us," Karen said loudly, clearly for the benefit of the cameras she'd brought along. I hadn't noticed them until then. Two young men in plain clothes with phones mounted on gimbals, recording every angle. Probably hoping for a viral clip of the rogue Bulldozer man. I smiled internally. She didn't know I'd spent 5 years in state-level PR damage control. If this was a media war, she was out of her depth. You're trespassing, I said calmly, and interfering with an active government operation. Again. One of the HOA men stepped forward, muscles flexed. You going to arrest us? No, I said, stepping back, but I will call the sheriff. And this time I won't ask nicely. Kayla's voice buzzed in my earpiece. They just went live. Instagram and Facebook streams are both running. Of course they were. I turned slightly, making sure my face was visible, to the closest camera. My name is Eli Callahan, I said, voice steady, measured. I'm the director of the Ridgewater State Resilience Project appointed by the governor's office to execute federally funded disaster prevention infrastructure in this area. This land is under state jurisdiction. Anyone who continues to obstruct this operation will be cited under Penal Code 345.1 for interference with public works and subject to prosecution. Karen paled. Cut the stream, she hissed at one of the young men. They hesitated. Then the screen dimmed as the broadcast ended. Behind Karen, the residents began to murmur. Carl, a familiar face I'd seen yesterday at the grocery store, was among them. He looked from me to Karen, then quietly stepped back from the group. The man with the binder flipped a few pages, clearly unsure now. I softened my tone just a little. Look, I get it. You care about this place. So do I. But this isn't about flower beds or walking trails. It's about protecting this community from the next 100-year flood. You want to help? Great. Volunteer. Spread the word. But don't block the people trying to keep your homes from washing into the lake. Karen didn't answer. She turned on her heel and walked back toward the subdivision road, leaving her entourage behind. The enforcement officer and the binder man followed. So did the camera crew. But not everyone. A woman in her 30s with a baby strapped to her chest approached me, nervous but sincere. My husband's a firefighter, she said. He's been talking about the flood maps for years. Said this hill would be underwater if the next one hits like '04. I nodded. He's right. She looked over the site, then back at me. You really work for the governor? I do. She nodded again. Then, thank you for coming back. That night, as the last light bled across the water, I sat on the porch of the trailer sipping strong coffee while Murphy dozed beside me. The Bulldozer sat quiet, its engine cooling, but the ground it had touched today was just the beginning. Karen had retreated but not surrendered. And I knew her next move wouldn't be just about blocking dirt. She'd go for the heart of the project next, permitting funding and public perception, which meant tomorrow I'd be ready, not just with law, with truth, and a bulldozer that wasn't going to stop again. True to form, Karen didn't stay quiet for long. By Tuesday morning, a wave of complaints had already started pouring in, not to me, but to the city zoning board, the mayor's office, the Department of Environmental Protection, and even the local news outlet. It was clear she had spent the evening rallying her allies and flooding every inbox she could find. Each complaint followed the same tone that the project was a violation of community trust, that unregulated government forces were invading HOA land, and that state-backed bulldozers were tearing through family trails. One letter even called it an ecological assault on protected greenbelt terrain, which was hilarious, considering we had to haul out 3 dumpsters worth of HOA-approved plastic playground equipment and fake rock benches to make way for the erosion trench. Still, it worked to a degree. By mid-morning, I received an email from a regional supervisor asking for clarification on the boundary lines. A city council member called and asked somewhat nervously if I could just slow down a few days to let everyone breathe. And then came the knock. It wasn't Karen. It was a courier holding a certified envelope marked Notice of Cease and Desist, filed on behalf of the Millstone Waterside Homeowners Association, citing alleged encroachment upon common use grounds and non-compliance with community permitting standards. Inside were 6 pages of dense, laughably inaccurate language. Terms like sovereign HOA jurisdiction, emergency override clause, and even provisional conservatorship of adjacent terrain were peppered throughout as if legal jargon could be summoned like a protective spell. They even included a stop work order complete with a fancy letterhead and a fake seal that looked like it had been designed on Canva. Kayla raised an eyebrow when I handed it to her. You want me to call legal? She asked. Already did, I replied. State Council is reviewing it now. It'll be shredded before lunch. But I didn't dismiss it entirely. Because I knew Karen's goal wasn't to win a legal battle, it was to slow us down, to confuse, to create enough noise that someone with less backbone than me would hesitate, panic, and eventually fold. That's how she'd built her little empire here in Millstone, not through authority, but attrition. By noon, she was back on site not in person this time, but via proxy. A white SUV rolled up and out stepped a local attorney I recognized from zoning committee days, slick suit, slicker hair, and an ego that had its own area code. His name was Jason Loring, and I could tell from the way he strutted toward me that he thought this was going to be easy. "Mr. Callahan," he said, flashing a too-white smile. "Jason Loring, legal counsel for Millstone Waterside HOA. "I know who you are," I said, not offering my hand. He didn't flinch. "I'm here to serve formal notice. The HOA has moved to enjoin this project based on a failure to consult the community and inadequate public disclosure regarding your intentions here." "Our intentions are clearly posted online," Kayla interjected. "And we conducted 3 public info sessions in the past 60 days. "Yes," Loring said, "but none of them were held in Millstone Heights, and none included the HOA on the panel." "Because the HOA doesn't have standing," I said flatly. "They're not a legal authority on this land. They're a volunteer committee." Loring smiled wider, as if he was waiting for that. "You see, that's where the confusion lies. The HOA has documented maintenance and community investment in this land going back 6 years. That establishes implied stewardship." I laughed. "That's not how public land works." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "It doesn't matter if you're technically right. All I need is an injunction hearing. 2 weeks of delay. Maybe a media cycle, that's all. Long enough to scare your funders or bring in the preservation lobby." "So you're bluffing." "I'm negotiating," he replied smoothly. "Karen's willing to meet halfway. Cut the project zone in half. Keep your trench out of sight. Move the access road." "No," I said. He blinked. "Excuse me?" "No compromise," I repeated. "This isn't a business merger. This is about flood prevention, people's homes, their safety. I'm not giving a single foot of ground to a fake title and a clipboard." Loring exhaled slowly. "Then I hope you like courtrooms." "I do," I said, stepping closer. "But I think you should call Karen and tell her to stop digging. Because the only thing worse than fighting a guy with authority is fighting one with receipts." He left shortly after the swagger in his step noticeably diminished. Kayla handed me a new stack of permit confirmations to sign. "Our council says their cease and desist is legally meaningless. 0 teeth." "Good," I said. "But make sure we document everything. Every approach, every disruption, every threat." We continued the work. The bulldozers pushed forward, grading the basin and carving out the trench zone. Drone footage captured our progress, and I made sure it was uploaded nightly to the project website, along with time-stamped reports and community notices. Transparency wasn't just defense, it was a weapon. That evening, I received a message. Not a letter, not a knock, a voicemail. Karen's voice clipped and cold. "You're turning this place upside down. This community doesn't want you here. Don't think a fancy job title will protect you. We'll outlast you." I listened to it twice, then saved it, because intimidation once recorded becomes evidence. And Karen had just handed me a loaded card, one I had no intention of using yet, but one I'd keep in my back pocket all the same. The power play had begun. But this wasn't her boardroom anymore. This was my site, and I'd already started building the foundation. It started with the coffee shop, a place I'd stopped by since my first days in Millstone back when I was just a teenager scraping together enough for a black drip and a blueberry scone. Now under new ownership with reclaimed wood tables and a chalkboard menu that changed every week, it still smelled the same cinnamon espresso and something nostalgic. But this time when I stepped through the door, the air changed. The barista, a tall kid with shaggy hair and a college sweatshirt, glanced up from the register. His hand hesitated just slightly as he reached for a cup. "You here for the trench thing?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "I am," I said. "Large black coffee, please." He nodded but didn't look me in the eye. As he turned to pour, I heard whispers from the corner table. 2 women sat their mid-40s, athletic wear HOA-branded water bottles on the table between them. One of them held up her phone and showed the screen to the other. They weren't subtle. "Look at what they're doing to the hill," one muttered. "It's just destruction." "Karen said he's not even from here," the other added. "Total outsider." I took my coffee and left without saying a word. By that afternoon, the online push had begun. The HOA's Facebook group, previously dormant save for lost cat posts and lawn fertilizer discussions, was now a battleground of hashtags, accusations, and heavily filtered drone images. Save our commons. State bulldozers ilse government overreach. Who really sent Ellie Callahan? There were doctored maps that showed the trench running through someone's backyard. It didn't. A meme of me photoshopped into a bulldozer with devil horns, creative at least. And a short, heavily edited video clip of Karen's confrontation from the second day, making it look like I had barked legal threats at her unprovoked. The truth didn't matter in the comment section. I recognized some of the names: parents of childhood friends, church elders, a few former teachers, people I had grown up waving to, now questioning my integrity from behind keyboards. Another outsider trying to change our town. Callahan's just a puppet for the governor. They're using climate change as an excuse to steal our green space. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Anything I said would feed the fire. Instead, I turned my attention inward, tightening the team, reinforcing protocols, and preparing for the next stage of pushback. Because Karen hadn't just declared war on the project, she'd declared war on me. By Thursday, we were being followed. A white SUV, the same model Karen drove, began circling the site perimeter. It never entered the boundary markers, but always lingered just beyond. Sometimes it parked on the trailhead lot, with tinted windows up. Other times it rolled past slowly, its driver pretending to check a GPS app. Kayla started logging license plates. We saw the same 4 cars repeatedly. That evening, someone spray-painted "Go home" on the temporary fencing. We had it removed within the hour, but the message was clear. The neighbors didn't just disapprove. They had been turned. Karen was using the oldest tactic in the book: isolate, divide, and reframe. She painted me as the outsider, the destroyer, the face of a faceless state. And for people clinging to the illusion of control in a rapidly changing world, that narrative was easier to swallow than the truth. At the construction trailer, I called a meeting with my team. Kayla, Vince, the drone operator, 3 logistics staff, our environmental consultant. Each one of them looked worn, tired, but loyal. They're escalating, I told them. You all have the option to step away. No shame, no judgment. This isn't what most of you signed up for. Vince grunted. I've been cussed out in 3 languages and had a backhoe roll over my foot. You think a bored PTA mom is going to scare me? Laughter eased some of the tension, but not all. Kayla stayed silent for a moment, then said, "Do we have the governor's full backing?" I met her eyes. Yes. That answer steadied the room. The next morning, a man knocked on the trailer door. Tall, suit and tie, a clipboard in hand. He introduced himself as Daniel Kearns, HOA Board Liaison for Community Response. His tone was smooth, too smooth. We'd like to offer a collaborative solution, he said. Temporary pause. Community review. Joint planning sessions. I looked him straight in the eye. That sounds a lot like a delay tactic. He smiled politely. Just goodwill. We're not pausing, I said. Not for reviews, not for surveys, not for ego. He tilted his head. So you're refusing to work with the community? I am working with the community, I replied. Just not the self-appointed gatekeepers of it. He handed me a printed letter, another formal request for a 14-day moratorium. I folded it, once dropped it in the trash, and closed the door behind him. That night, as I walked the perimeter of the site under the pale moonlight, Murphy trailing behind, I saw a sign posted just beyond the fencing. The lake doesn't belong to the state. Underneath, in sharp black ink, and neither does Millstone. It wasn't a threat. It was a declaration. A belief held tightly by people who had lived in the illusion of control for too long. Who thought property lines gave them dominion over policy. Who believed that HOA bylaws could override gravity erosion and the rising flood maps that didn't care about their backyard parties. They didn't hate me. They hated what I represented. Change. And the more they feared it, the more they'd fight not with logic, but with fear. But fear only works if you let it in. And I'd spent too long in real battles to flinch from paint and pamphlets. Tomorrow we'd break ground on the eastern slope. And this time, no one, not Karen, not the cameras, not the neighbors holding signs, would stop the work. It was just past 7 a.m. when I saw her again this time, not flanked by HOA enforcers or camera crews, but alone, standing at the edge of the trail near the eastern slope where we were about to break ground. The light caught the side of her face, casting a faint gold along her sunglasses. Her arms were crossed, her stance deliberate, like she'd been waiting there a while. Murphy saw her first. He growled softly. I gave him a signal to stay. I walked the few hundred feet over to her slow and steady boots crunching dry gravel clipboard tucked under one arm. I didn't speak first. Neither did she. Finally, I broke the silence. You're up early. Karen didn't move. So are you. I nodded once. Always have been. We stood there for a beat longer, watching the mist roll off the lake beyond the tree line. The birds were just starting to stir. Somewhere down the path, I could hear the low mechanical rumble of the bulldozer warming up. I assume you're here to try and stop us again, I said. I'm here to ask one last time, she replied. Please reconsider. Her tone was different this time. Not the weaponized cheerfulness she usually wielded like a blade. This was quieter. But it wasn't humility. It was desperation dressed as diplomacy. I said nothing, letting her fill the space. You have to understand what this looks like from our side, she continued. People bought homes here thinking it would stay the same. That the woods wouldn't vanish. That their views wouldn't be blocked by earth movers and dump trucks. The woods aren't vanishing, I said calmly. The slope is being reinforced. The runoff system is being modernized. And that blocked view is the price of keeping their basements from turning into swimming pools next spring. They didn't vote for this, she shot back. They didn't need to, I said. It's state land, state project, emergency coded, and you're not the governing body here, no matter how many meetings you host or how many people you email. She flinched, just barely. You think I'm the villain, she said. I think you're afraid, I replied, of losing control. Karen turned to face me fully now. Her eyes for once weren't shielded by smugness. They were hard, but tired. You left, she said. You weren't here when the storms came, when the trail washed out, when the trees started falling. I was in Houston, helping dig out neighborhoods that lost their power grid for 3 weeks, I answered. I was in South Dakota rebuilding levees. I was in New Orleans laying out disaster corridors for communities no HOA could save. I left Millstone, yes, but I didn't stop working for it. She looked away. I took a step closer, not to intimidate, but to make sure she heard every word. I'm going to say this once, I said. You need to stop. No more proxy lawyers, no more fake notices, no more spreading lies about what this project is. If you continue to obstruct, I will escalate this beyond cease and desist. I'll involve the Attorney General's office. I'll request a formal investigation into HOA fund usage, annexation attempts, and procedural misconduct. Her face tightened. That's a threat. It's a warning, I said. The last polite one you'll get. She didn't reply. Not with words. But something in her posture shifted, a little less upright, a little more brittle. I walked away. Behind me, Murphy rose from his spot and followed, tail swishing. Back at the site, Kayla was waiting with a fresh schematic and a second cup of coffee. Everything good? She's cracking, I said. I'll believe it when she's not standing in front of a bulldozer, Kayla muttered. Fair point. But the day was different. There were no HOA enforcers. No makeshift barricades. No SUVs creeping the perimeter. Just our crew. The early hum of equipment and the sun rising over a project we were finally able to move forward with. We cleared 20 yards of grade that morning, set 3 foundation anchors, stabilized a retaining wall that had been leaning for years. The drone captured it all, footage I later posted online with the caption, "Progress protects people." That afternoon, a resident approached me. She was older, maybe late 70s, with a cane in one hand and a tote bag in the other. I'd seen her once before pushing a grocery cart in town. She wore a sun hat and a quiet resolve. "You're the one in charge?" she asked. "I am." She held out a Tupperware container. Lemon squares, from scratch. I blinked. "For me, for your crew." I heard what happened last night with the sign. Not everyone here's lost their minds. I smiled. "Thank you." She turned to go, then paused. "Don't stop, Mr. Callahan. We need this." Some of us just forgot how to say it out loud. That evening, I sat on the trailer steps and watched the sun settle over the ridge. The wind was cool, the air calm. And for the first time in days, I allowed myself to feel something other than vigilance. Karen had been warned. Now it was on her. Because I hadn't come back to win arguments. I'd come back to build something that lasted. By the following morning, I thought naively that the warning might have sunk in. Karen had backed down from the site. The HOA Facebook group had gone strangely quiet. Even the usual neighborhood gawkers had stopped circling the job site with their iced coffees and thinly veiled judgment. For a moment, we all exhaled. But with people like Karen, silence is rarely surrender. It's strategy. And hers was about to explode into the most reckless move she'd made yet. The day started routine. Vince had the excavator digging the lower contour for the culvert basin, while Kayla coordinated the delivery of gravel backfill. By noon, we were ahead of schedule. 65% of the trench line had been cleared, and the first load of precast stormwater modules was set to arrive after lunch. We were finally gaining momentum. And then the radio crackled. Eli. We've got a situation up front, came Miguel's voice, one of our logistics guys. You need to see this. I walked up the trail toward the staging entrance, Murphy padding beside me, tail stiff. The sight stopped me cold. 3 large concrete barricades had been dropped across the dirt access road, right at the narrowest point where our trucks entered with supplies, and where the bulldozer had to reverse to refuel. Orange mesh fencing had been tied between them, staked into the earth on either side. On the fencing, a freshly printed sign flapped in the breeze. HOA Safety Enforcement Zone, do not enter, trespassers will be fined. Beside the barricades stood 2 men in bright yellow security vests, both stocky arms, folded sunglasses on. I recognized one, a part-time HOA landscaper. The other had a patch on his chest that read Private Property Patrol. And there, standing behind them like the director of her own low-budget farce, was Karen. Hands on hips, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. She waved when she saw me, waved. Thought we agreed to slow things down, she said, voice too sweet, too smug. This is just a temporary safety measure. There have been complaints. I stepped closer. You're blocking a government worksite with illegally placed structures. You understand that, right? Her tone sharpened. This road is part of the HOA-managed Greenbelt. We maintain it. We have the right to restrict access for safety. I pointed to the printed ordinance sign she had posted. This is fabricated. There's no such thing as an HOA safety enforcement zone under county code. You're inventing authority. One of the men crossed his arms harder. Ma'am said no one's allowed past without her approval. I turned to him. What's your name? Jake. You work for a licensed security firm, Jake. He hesitated. I work for the community. That was all I needed to hear. I pulled out my phone and opened the direct contact app the governor's office had installed for situations exactly like this. One button sent a log ping to the State Office of Legal Infrastructure. Another opened a line to the Department of Public Safety Field Response Unit. I hit both. Karen, I said you've officially crossed the line. She scoffed. I'm protecting this community. No, you're obstructing state emergency infrastructure. Again. But this time, you're doing it with unlicensed personnel, forged signage, and unauthorized blockades on public access trails. Kayla appeared behind me, eyes wide. 2 of our trucks are stuck on the fire road. They can't deliver the culverts until those barricades are moved. And we've got the county inspector scheduled at 2 hours, I muttered. Karen's smile widened. Guess you'll just have to reschedule. 45 minutes later, the cavalry arrived. Not with sirens, not with flashbangs, just quiet authority. A black SUV with state plates, a county sheriff cruiser, and stepping out in a slate gray blazer, a woman named Allison Tran, the deputy director of the Office of Resilience Enforcement. She didn't speak to Karen first. She walked straight toward me, nodded once, and said, "This the interference zone?" "It is," I replied. "Cameras have been rolling since 11:52 a.m. She turned to Karen. "Ma'am, I'm Deputy Director Tran. I'm informing you that you are in violation of Title VI Infrastructure Access Code Section 112 and State Emergency Operations, Article 4C. You are hereby ordered to remove all obstructions within the next 5 minutes or face immediate legal action." Karen blinked. "Wait, this is state land." "It's been state land," I said, "since before your HOA formed." She turned to the men in the vests. "Don't move anything." Tran didn't flinch. "Jake, is it?" The man nodded. "You're not on a licensed security roster, and you've been recorded giving false enforcement statements. Leave now, or I'll have the sheriff detain you for impersonating municipal personnel." He stepped back. The other man followed. Karen's hands trembled slightly. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Tran checked her watch. 2 minutes left, Ms. Cartwright. And like that, the spell broke. Karen turned, barked something unintelligible at the 2 men, and they began dismantling the mesh fencing. The concrete barriers were shoved aside with grunts and curses. The staging lane reopened. Our trucks rolled through. 10 minutes later, drivers shaking their heads in disbelief. The sheriff handed Karen a printed warning 1 step below a citation and informed her that any future interference would result in full legal action, including civil penalties and criminal obstruction charges. Karen didn't look at me once. Later that evening, I sat by the culvert site watching the modules get placed one by one under the twilight sky. Kayla passed me a bottle of water and flopped onto the ground beside me. She really thought she could get away with it, she said. She wasn't trying to win, I replied. She was trying to stall, buy time, shift perception. But now she's exposed, and she knows it. Murphy trotted over and laid his head in my lap. We'd gotten through the worst of it, or so I thought. But people like Karen don't surrender. They regroup, and when they do, they aim higher. The question was, would she go public next? Would she escalate to the media? Because one thing was certain, she'd just lost the ground war, which meant the air war was coming. By the time the last culvert was lowered into place and secured with gravel backfill, the site was quiet again. The barricades were gone, the road cleared, and the bulldozer had pushed forward another 30 feet into the slope. On paper, the workday had been a success, but I couldn't shake the weight in my chest, the unmistakable sense that we were only in the eye of the storm. Karen had lost ground, yes, but she hadn't vanished. She hadn't retreated in shame or admitted defeat. She had simply watched. Her silence wasn't concession, it was calculation. And I'd been around enough politicians and operators to know that when people like Karen go quiet, they're plotting their next move. So I made one of my own. Not out of panic, not out of fear, out of timing. I sat down inside this trailer, locked the door behind me, and opened the secure line on my laptop. It was an encrypted system routed through the governor's emergency project liaison portal. A single contact code brought up a small list of internal liaisons, and at the top of the list was one name. Governor Hadley, direct. I hovered for a moment. The last time I'd used this line was during a post-hurricane dam crisis in central Texas. Before that, a wildfire corridor collapse in northern Nevada. You didn't call the governor unless you had a reason, a real reason. This felt like one. I tapped the screen. 2 rings. Then Hadley, her voice calm as ever. Governor, I said, it's Callahan. I figured, she replied. You don't ring this line unless there's blood or paperwork. No blood yet, I said, but the paperwork's coming. She paused. Talk to me. So I did. I laid it all out. The barricades, the fake notices, the use of unlicensed personnel, the camera crews, the media smear attempts, the coordinated harassment, the escalating tension among residents, the subtle quiet attempts to erode confidence in the project one tactic at a time. She's not going to stop, I said. Not until she's either removed or she drags this community into a full-on breakdown. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then the governor said, You want me to make the call? Yes. To the mayor, to everyone. City, county, state. All of it. She exhaled. You've got it. And Callahan. Yes. I should have sent you sooner. The line went dead. I sat back in my chair, heart thudding. Not from anxiety, from momentum. It was like flipping a hidden switch. The weight was no longer mine alone to carry. The cavalry was coming, but this time, they'd come not with clipboards or permits, but with authority. By the next morning, the response had already begun to ripple outward. At 8:17 a.m., I received an email from the State Office of Compliance and Infrastructure Oversight. A formal order had been filed instructing the HOA to cease all representative or unofficial communication regarding the Ridgewater project pending an active investigation. At 9:30 a.m., the County Board of Records sent me confirmation that the parcel annexation claims made by the Millstone Waterside HOA had been reviewed and voided. And at 10:02 a.m., a silver sedan pulled up to the site, and out stepped a man in a gray tailored suit with the state seal on his breast pocket. His name was Alan Truitt, Chief of Field Operations for the Governor's Legal Task Force. He walked straight up to me, shook my hand firmly, and said, We're here to clean house. Behind him, another car pulled up, and then another. Soon 5 state personnel were on site, clipboards in hand, but not the flimsy kind Karen carried. These were auditors, zoning specialists, legal compliance officers, each one armed with folders full of receipts, timelines, testimonies, and public records. I nodded toward the boundary line. Karen's house is 3 lots down. HOA headquarters is across the path. Truitt smiled, calm and efficient. We already have her statement. She was served this morning. Her responses were evasive. And the board resigned, he said simply. All but one member, the treasurer. She's cooperating. We'll be freezing the account today. Kayla appeared beside me, eyes wide. Wait, you mean Truitt nodded. As of this morning, the Millstone Waterside HOA has been placed under temporary state oversight, pending full legal review. I let out a long breath. It was done. The structure, the paper-thin regime Karen had built on fear, rules, and illusion, had finally crumbled under the weight of its own fiction. That afternoon, I received a text message from an unknown number. You didn't have to do this. You could have let it go. This won't be the end. I read it once, then deleted it. Later, I learned it had come from a burner phone. Karen had left town. No forwarding address. No formal goodbye. Just a sudden for sale sign on her porch and a note to her neighbors saying personal reasons had called her elsewhere. But the community stayed, and it started waking up. That evening, I walked the trail along the eastern slope past the newly cut channel and retention lines. The sun dipped low over the lake. Murphy bounded ahead, tail wagging. The trees rustled not with tension, but with release. At the overlook, I saw someone standing quietly. It was Carl, one of the neighbors who'd once looked away when I passed by. Now he was holding a shovel, leaning on it, watching the bulldozers in the distance. He turned when he saw me. You called the governor, he said, not accusing, just amazed. She called me first, I replied. He nodded slowly. You didn't have to do all this. You could have packed up, moved on. I did pack up once, I said, but I left too much behind. He looked down the trail, then at the sky. Guess we owe you more than we realized. No, I said, you don't owe me anything. Just take care of this place. Don't let people like her take root again. He offered his hand. We shook. And for the first time since I returned to Millstone, it didn't feel like I was on someone else's land. It felt like home again. The next 48 hours moved faster than the previous 2 weeks combined. After my call, the governor's office didn't just intervene quietly. They made it public. Not to shame, not to retaliate, but to us reaffirm authority and transparency. In a place where the lines between HOA power and real governance had become dangerously blurred, it began with a press release issued by the Office of Emergency Infrastructure and signed by Governor Hadley herself. It outlined the Ridgewater project in detail, its scope, its legal foundation, its public benefit. But the part that made headlines, the obstruction of this state-sanctioned project by an unrecognized body operating outside its legal authority, will be addressed with the seriousness it demands. Public safety is not negotiable. The local papers picked it up first. By midday, regional outlets were covering the story. HOA drama always drew interest, but this one had the perfect recipe. A rogue president, a state-backed project, and a showdown featuring direct gubernatorial intervention. That evening, I was interviewed live on the evening news. I stood not behind a desk or in an office, but in front of the eastern slope, hard hat in hand, culverts behind me like quiet symbols of progress. Mr. Callahan, the reporter asked, how does it feel knowing you had to involve the highest level of government to do your job in your own hometown? I looked into the camera. It's not about my job. It's about every person who pays taxes, who votes, who believes infrastructure should protect us, not get blocked by a sign taped to a garden fence. I'm not here for recognition. I'm here because the work matters. The clip went viral. Within hours, my inbox flooded with messages, not from journalists or HOA officials, but from residents of other communities. People from across the state and even a few from out of state wrote to thank us for standing firm, for pushing back, for not walking away. Many of them had their own Karens. Back in Millstone, the atmosphere shifted rapidly. Alma Ruiz, one of the few remaining original HOA members not tied to Karen's power circle, called a town meeting. She held it at the local library, the same one Karen had tried to privatize 2 years earlier, by proposing mandatory HOA membership fees for communal services. The room was full, and not with protesters this time. I sat quietly in the back row. Alma stood at the podium and read aloud the governor's statement. Then she cleared her throat and did something Karen never had the courage to do. She apologized to those who were misled, to those who felt afraid to speak up, to those who thought this community had become something closed, something small, something owned. I'm sorry. That ends tonight. The crowd applauded. Not a standing ovation, just the kind of slow, solemn clapping that signaled relief and respect. The next day, the Estate Review Committee arrived. They set up a temporary office inside the community center where they conducted interviews, reviewed documents, and examined HOA decisions dating back 6 years. Kayla helped sort the project files while Vince personally guided the inspectors around the trench system, showing how the runoff patterns had already shifted. By day's end, 3 of the HOA's most questionable resolutions had been suspended: the Greenbelt Annexation Clause, the Enforcement Fee Authority, and the Emergency Landscaping Regulation, which was just code for Karen's power to fine people over unapproved flower beds. Karen's name was scrubbed from the community website. Her house remained on the market, its porch swept clean, the infamous clipboard mailbox gone. A young couple toured it one afternoon, holding hands, smiling, laughing with the realtor. I wished them well silently. Across the lake, someone had added a new wooden sign at the edge of the old trailhead, simple hand-carved and fastened between 2 cedar posts. Ridge Water Path, public access trail, protected by State Resilience Project, in memory of what happens when good people stay quiet too long. No signature, no credit, just truth. On Friday, I received a handwritten note in an envelope with no return address. Inside, in neat cursive, "You were right. I wanted to be queen of a hill that wasn't mine. I'm leaving, not because I lost, but because you made me remember what it means to belong, and how far I'd drifted from it. No name, but I knew." And for the first time, I felt not vindication, but closure. That weekend, we finished the first full phase of the project. The trench was secured, the erosion controls installed, the slope stabilized, the town safe for real, for good. I stood on the ridge that Sunday morning, Murphy at my side, the sun breaking through early fog. Kayla joined me, coffee thermos in hand. "You ever going to write a book about this?" she asked. "I think this was the book," I said. She nodded. "What happens now?" I looked down at the trail, at the rows of homes slowly waking to a different rhythm, no longer ruled by quiet fear. "Now," I said. "Now we rebuild on solid ground." Monday arrived with the kind of sky that promised no surprises: flat blue, a few lazy clouds, and a breeze that whispered through the trees like it had forgotten the past 3 weeks ever happened. But the town hadn't forgotten, not by a long shot. By now, the Charter, Millstone Waterside HOA, was little more than a hollow shell, a name without a structure, a signpost without a direction. The state audit was ongoing, but the core truth had been unearthed for all to see. Karen's power wasn't rooted in law, but in perception, repetition, and silence. And when that silence broke, her castle crumbled. Still, there were loose ends to tie off, not just legally, but emotionally. Because after weeks of tension, suspicion, and division, this town needed more than policy fixes. It needed a reckoning and a clearing of the air. That evening, the Millstone Town Hall opened its doors for a community gathering unlike any the town had seen. No agenda, no formal speakers, just an open forum announced on paper flyers and local radio, not social media. Everyone was welcome, no titles required. Kayla and I arrived early and set up a simple table in the back just in case people had questions about the Ridge Water Project. We weren't there to defend anything, just to listen. By 6 p.m., the room was full. Not shoulder-to-shoulder packed like the old HOA votes, where Karen counted the hands herself, but comfortably full in a way that felt organic. Alma took the mic first. She stood beneath the old community bulletin board. No notes, no script. We thought we were protecting something she began. But somewhere along the way, we forgot who the we actually was. No one clapped, no one booed. They just listened. One by one, residents took turns at the microphone. Some apologized. Some shared stories of warnings they'd ignored, fines they'd paid, flower beds ripped out because the color didn't match the approved palette. Carl stood up and admitted he'd voted for Karen as HOA president 5 times. Not because he liked her, but because I figured she was the only one willing to deal with the paperwork. A young mother described being threatened with violations for chalk drawings her kids made on the sidewalk. An older man recounted a time Karen called animal control because his dog's barking disrupted community tranquility. It wasn't a trial. It wasn't a purge. It was truth-telling. And truth, when spoken aloud in the open air, has a way of reclaiming power from those who hoard it. Then, without being asked, people began to volunteer. "I'll help revise the new community charter," one woman said. "I can organize a neighborhood safety team," Real Safety said, a retired fire marshal. "I'll clean up the lake path," another man added, "and maybe add some native plants. I've got a green thumb." No HOA needed. The room didn't cheer. They didn't chant. But I saw it, the shift, the rebuilding. Not with bulldozers or laws, but with neighbors finally seeing one another without the filters that fear had installed. And for a moment, I thought about Karen. Not with spite, but with clarity. She had filled a vacuum of leadership. When no one else stepped up, she had, and then she twisted that role until it served her more than it served the community. She became the queen of a cardboard crown, but she'd never counted on the power of memory, of return, of someone who knew how the system worked and had the backbone to challenge it. Outside the hall, long after the crowd had trickled away, I sat on a bench beneath a lamppost and listened to the quiet. Murphy sat at my feet, chin resting on his paws. Kayla walked over, hands in her jacket pockets. "Guess this is the closest thing to a happy ending we get," she said. I smiled. No torches, no pitchforks, just people waking up. She glanced toward the lake. "It feels different now." "Because it is," I said. We stood for a while in silence. Then Kayla asked, "You staying when the project ends?" I didn't answer right away. I thought about leaving, I admitted. Thought about finishing the report, handing off to the next contractor, and disappearing back into the machine. But now, I looked toward the path, the same one where Karen once blocked my crew, with barricades and empty threats. Now I want to see what happens when people stop letting fear run their neighborhood. She nodded. Besides, I added, someone's got to make sure the benches they install this time actually face the water. That night, I walked home through the trail lit only by stars and the soft amber glow of porch lights. For the first time, no signs were posted. No warnings, no barricades, just open ground, the way it should have been all along. On my doorstep was a brown paper bag. Inside, a jar of homemade apple butter and a note. "Welcome back. You were missed more than you knew." No name, just a neighbor. Just a town finding its voice again. Just the beginning of something real. The final stretch of the Ridgewater project came not with a roar, but with the steady hum of things falling into place. After weeks of public meetings, interviews, and untangling the mess Karen's reign had left behind, the project finally transitioned from state-supervised to community-owned. The flood management systems were complete. The erosion barriers had been planted with native grasses. The boardwalk, once a target of Karen's endless fines, had been rebuilt, this time wider and wheelchair accessible. But the most meaningful part, it wasn't the physical changes. It was how the town carried itself now. People walked slower down the streets. They waved longer. They lingered on porches without fear of being cited for visible clutter if a rocking chair was left too far from the threshold. The difference wasn't just in tone. It was in freedom. I took a slow lap through town one crisp Thursday morning. Murphy jogging alongside me, tongue lolling out, tail wagging as he sniffed every bush and fire hydrant like he was discovering them for the first time. I passed the old HOA office. The building was still there, a bland beige box that once held more threat than function. Now it sat empty, windows cleared of notices, its flagpole bare. A new sign had been tacked up, "Coming soon, Millstone Welcome Center." The town council had approved a plan to turn it into a space for newcomers' events and civic education. I smiled. A better use, a peaceful repurposing. I didn't need it to be torn down. I just needed it to stop hurting people. That afternoon, I met with Governor Hadley one final time. We sat on the patio of a small diner overlooking the lake. No suits, no press. Just 2 cups of black coffee and a pair of well-earned silences. "I read your final report," she said, sliding a copy across the table. "It's one of the best I've seen in 20 years. "Had a lot of motivation," I said, taking a sip. She chuckled. "You ever think of running for office?" I nearly spit out my coffee. "Governor, I just survived a HOA turf war. I think I'll settle for quiet mornings and mulch deliveries." She grinned. "Fair. But if you ever change your mind, the state could use a few more people who know how to swing a shovel and write a legal memorandum." We clinked mugs and sat in companionable silence. Before she left, she leaned in and said, "You didn't just fix a town, Callahan. You reminded people they could take their town back." I didn't have words, so I nodded. Sometimes that's enough. The closing ceremony for the Ridgewater project was held on a Saturday morning. No banners, no fanfare. Just a few folding chairs under the trees and a wooden plaque unveiled at the mouth of the newly stabilized creek bed. On Ridgewater, Community Resilience Project. In service of the people by those who chose to stay. They asked me to say a few words. I didn't want to, but I did. I stood up with Murphy at my feet. The town gathered around, faces familiar, now not as obstacles, but as neighbors. I came back to do a job I began. What I didn't expect was to remember how much this place used to mean to me. I looked at Kayla in the crowd, at Alma, at Vince, at the children running in the grass behind their parents. And what I didn't expect, I continued, was to see what happens when fear gets replaced by courage. Not the loud kind, but the steady kind. The kind that shows up to meetings, That volunteers, that listens, that pushes back when something isn't right, not with anger, but with truth. I paused. I don't think this town needs a hero. It just needs everyone to stop acting like someone else will fix it. There was no applause, just quiet nods, the good kind, the kind that says, "We heard you." A week later, I packed up my trailer. Kayla helped me tighten the straps on the final load of equipment. Vince had already arranged for the city to inherit the temporary worksite for use as a local maintenance hub. Heading back to the cabin, she asked. "For a while," I said. "Might even let the phone die for a few days." "You've earned it." Murphy barked in agreement. She looked around. "You think it'll last?" I looked at the town one more time, the trail now used daily, the park filled with music, the community center doors wide open. "I think it started," I said, "and that's enough." Before I left, I walked the full length of Ridgewater Path one last time. I passed the creek, the stabilization lines, the footbridge Karen once tried to condemn. At the far end, a wooden bench faced the lake. On it, a brass plaque read, "To the ones who stayed when it was easier to leave." I sat there with Murphy, the sun setting behind us, the water glowing golden blue. And I realized something. All those years in civil engineering, all those roads, bridges, and pipelines, I thought I built things to last. But sometimes, the most important thing you build is your trust. Between neighbors, between strangers, between who we were and who we decide to be next. And this time it would last, because now they knew how to fight for it.